This is the 18th Nand and Jeet Khemka Distinguished Speaker Forum, and the forum is endowed by Columbia Business School board member Nand Khemka and his wife Jeet. The idea is to bring business leaders from across the world to Columbia Business School to talk about topics related to the Indian business and economy. And today, it's a real pleasure to welcome CBS alum and founder of the South Asia Business Association, SABA, Rahul Kanodia, class of '93, who is Vice Chairman and CEO of Datamatics. At Datamatics, Rahul leads all strategic initiatives driving the company's long-term growth and profitability, and he was the chief architect of the company's transformation from a service-led organization to a digital solutions organization with an AI-first approach. Datamatics was recently named one of Forbes' Asia's 200 best under $1 billion companies, and Dun & Bradstreet recognized Datamatics as one of India's top 500 value creators. Datamatics was also identified by Microsoft for their impactful use of AI at scale. Rahul has also been a great friend and supporter of Columbia Business School, and we're really grateful for that. So please join me in welcoming Rahul, who will start by sharing his thoughts about the role of AI in business with a focus on India as well as Datamatics. We'll then chat briefly before turning it over to you all for Q&A. So please join me in welcoming Rahul.
Thank you. Thank you, Geeta. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be on campus again, although I miss Uris Hall and I miss the other campus, but it's nice to be here on campus once again. So a couple of comments just as an opening remark. The AI world is really transforming the way we all work, we all live, the way we function. It's probably the most transformative technology that we've experienced, at least in the recent past, other than the fire and perhaps the wheel and things like that. The estimated market for this is about $1.6 trillion by 2030. So that's in the next 5 years. Today, we are probably a few $100 billion in market opportunity, and that would be up to $1.6 trillion. So that's a huge opportunity to capture. And in this opportunity, many companies will go out of business, and many companies will flourish and capture this opportunity. But certainly, every company will be reinventing itself. It'll be forced to reinvent itself, and if it does not, it'll be out of business. The reason it'll be out of business is because your competition will adopt this technology, and whether you like it or not, they will be more efficient than you are. And if they're more efficient than you are, so the writing's on the wall where they will capture the opportunity and we will lose out. To quote Peter Diamandis, he's one of the visionaries, and he has a good view of what's happening. To quote him, he said there will be only 2 companies in the world: those that have fully adopted AI and those that are out of business. So that is very telling in many ways. The current progress that we see happening with AI, probably in the next 1 decade, we will see the technological transformation and progress as we have seen in the last 1 century. So whatever we saw in the last 1 century, all of that is going to be packed in the next decade. So that's the pace of change that we see happening. And it's certainly in many ways scary, but on the other hand, it presents a phenomenal opportunity for all of us. Today, everything, everyone is connected. You will always be connected, and you'll be connected everywhere. So you're connected everywhere, you're connected all the time. Every device is connected, every person is connected. And with this connection comes an AI element. So the AI and the individual human will know any information at any point in time, literally on the fly. Today we've got about 7 billion smartphones in the world, out of a population of about 8 billion, so almost every person carries a smartphone. About 3 billion 5G connections, and the 6G that's coming in, maybe in about 2 or 3 years, will be 20 times faster than the current 5G. Now, with 3 billion 5G connections, and that's increasing, and with the access to information that you have on the device, everybody will be carrying AI in his hand. And the moment every individual is carrying an AI component in his hand, he will be able to transform the world, because the pace at which it's working will be something that we can't even imagine. The humans typically think in a very linear fashion. So if you're growing at 10% a year or 20% a year, you project out for 5 years, 20%, you'll be 100%. But here we are growing exponentially, and therefore our thinking has to change, because in 5 years, you will not be 100% more, you'll probably be 1,000%. And that thought process is something that we really have to adopt. According to Gartner, about 85% of people who are in the contact center business will be out of business, because you will have AI agents doing all the communication with customers. You will not need humans. And according to Pricewaterhouse, about 40% of American jobs, white-collar jobs, will be made redundant using AI. So in some ways, that's scary. But in other ways, actually, I don't think it's as scary as they make it out to be. What's driving this AI? A couple of things. So one is Moore's law. Moore's law talks about computing power doubling every 2 years. That still stands. It's been going on since the 50s. It continues to be moving at the same pace as we speak. Along with that, data is also following Moore's law. Data is also doubling every 2 years. And 90% of the data we have in the world was generated in the last 2 years. So at that pace, when you're generating data, it is phenomenal. These two things together are driving AI. The computing power has improved. NVIDIA is really cashing in, and all of you, I'm sure, are tracking NVIDIA and the performance. AI feeds on information, and that's doubling every 2 years. The cost of training AI has come down by about 99.5% in the last 5 years. So a huge, huge drop in the cost of training. And then, of course, the money that's going behind. Today, about $360 billion will be invested this year in AI R&D. That's a lot. In AI products, in AI R&D, in all these foundation models that you see happening. And of course, with all of these, the algorithms are improving. So with the algorithms improving, money going in, computing power increasing exponentially, data being available, we will see a sea change in the next couple of years, at least in the next 5 to 10 years that we see. And therefore, I think it will be a transformative experience that all of us have. All of you here are at the right point at the right time, because the world that's looking ahead of us is very, very exciting. Some people get scared with it, but I think it's more about adopting it and not about getting scared. I remember in India, when computers were being launched, all the banks, they were mostly government-owned banks, all the people went on strike, saying we don't want computers because we will lose our jobs. And in reality, what you see today is they're fully computerized. The banks are bigger than they ever were. There are more people being employed, and the opportunity is simply great. I think the same thing is going to happen with AI. So with that, I'll just conclude my closing comments and hand it over to Gita.
Wow, those were some amazing statistics. I just made some notes. You said something like, in 1 decade, we will progress as much as we did in the last century.
Absolutely.
And 40% of white-collar jobs will be redundant. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing you ended with saying is that this is truly transformative, and it's a very exciting time for all of us, mm-hmm. and particularly for our students to be on the cusp of this exponential growth of AI. So all really interesting statistics here. Can you speak a little bit more from your experience about how AI is actually transforming businesses? You said it has this transformative power, but what are some concrete examples of things that are changing on the ground, perhaps the innovations that have come about? And let's start with the US context.
So let me give you an example of how actually it's creating jobs and not losing jobs. Mm-hmm. So we were doing a project with several US customers where we were doing work with them in India, out of the metro cities like Mumbai. Mm-hmm. And then we came up with this idea that let's see if we can, for cost purposes and even for social reasons, move these projects to a tier 2, tier 3 city. Mm-hmm. So we actually partnered with a company called JSW, Jindal Steel. Some of you may have heard of them. They have a factory in Bellary, somewhere outside of Bangalore. It's a steel mill, and they manufacture steel. And we spoke with them, and then we employed about 100 women who were wives and daughters of these steel mill workers. Now, steel mill workers are not very well-educated people, and the wives and daughters are even less so. And we were able to actually engage these 100 women working on live US projects in a village called Bellary. And there we used a platform where we had put an AI into that. And because of the AI component in that platform, the software was able to facilitate them in doing the quality of work that they did. Because if you're in Mumbai, you are well educated, you have a degree, you speak English fluently. That's not possible in a village. These women actually, so one is the social transformation, which we'll talk about. But here you could employ 100 women who were not very well educated to do life projects, thanks to AI. Otherwise, these people would not have had the job. And I would have been forced to do it out of Mumbai. So here, actually, you're creating an opportunity for a more inclusive society, people who otherwise could not access. So I think it's actually very useful and very productive. Now, the social transformation that's happened here is the average income of that household doubled. These people were able to fund their kids' education. Some of the women, you keep in mind a small village in India. It's different from a New York City. So these people were able to fund their own marriages. Dowry is a big issue in the country, and they could pay their own dowry. They learned English. They learned how to do project management. They learned how to use a computer. So suddenly they became sought after brides because they were earning money. They were able to pay their own money, own dowry. The average education moved from 4th grade to 8th grade. The childbearing age moved from probably 15, 16, 17 to 20. So that impacted the health. So the point I'm making is that the entire village was transformed because of the economic prowess that these people had. And in a way, it's thanks to AI. Otherwise, they could not have done that. So in some ways, it's transforming lives in very different ways that you can't even imagine, and also providing employment opportunities.
Can you speak a little bit about how AI enabled this particular application?
Yeah, so when they are processing, so for example, you're processing insurance claims, and we do that. We use today AI agents that do a straight-through processing. You don't need any human. It processes the entire claim, a death claim. So it validates all the information. It validates your medical records. It validates your doctor's bills. It checks whether you've already claimed insurance from another insurance company. So it checks for frauds and things like that, and then process the death claim. Today, of course, it's more potent. Now, you go back a few years ago, it was not as potent. So these people were able to process banking transactions and insurance transactions. Because the AI is able to do a lot and check for frauds, so the AI is able to correct information. You might make a human error, but the AI corrects it. So therefore, a less skilled person can do the same level of work.
Okay.
So that's how it augments your capability versus replacing capability.
And was there a lot of training required for this?
Not too much. About 2 months of training, but you need that.
Okay. Oh, that's a really great example. Are there other examples you've seen in India that are innovating, maybe in finance? You mentioned insurance claims, maybe in the healthcare sector, education.
Absolutely. So what's happening in India specifically, and also what's happening with companies working in India. So for example, we do work with several credit rating agencies, companies like Moody's and Fitch, and we process 42 million pages of balance sheet data every year. And they were doing, the financial analysts who were analyzing this were spending 250,000 hours a year processing all this financial data. And after we started deploying AI, we can do it in now 75,000 hours. So there's a huge reduction in effort, and it's a much faster turnaround. So these are examples. So India has latched on to this AI wave. The government is taking it very seriously. The government has invested about has budgeted $1.2 billion of investment in building all these models. They're building our own foundation model, which is the large language models. About $250 million are being spent over there, because India is a very diverse country, different languages, different cultures, and therefore the same models that work here in the US are not necessarily applicable. So you need to customize it for that environment. India plans to become the AI factory of the world. Today, there are about 420,000 people trained on AI in India. And it's probably the second largest population in the world, the largest being the US. I'm specifically not talking about China. I personally believe China is ahead of the US, but it's a little bit of a black box. So we really don't know the data. So keeping that aside, India would be today the second after the US in terms of talent availability and AI. Many companies are investing. Large corporations like Reliance are investing, government is investing, and there are several programs that have been launched with this digital first India strategy that is really transforming the country. So the idea being, how do you include the larger population? UPI being one, digital. So with UPI, for example, there are about 50 million merchants, 500 million users, and they process about 180 million transactions a year. On UPI, new enterprises have been formed, and the revenue is estimated about $100 billion for these new enterprises. So when new enterprises revenue of $100 billion have been formed on the back of UPI, that's a great economic opportunity. They're creating employment, they're creating jobs, they're creating businesses.
So when you talk about UPI, that's the United Payment Interface, which rides off the digital public infrastructure, which is a big backbone of everything that's happening in India, starting with the Aadhaar card, the biometric ID for all Indians. And this started 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. So how is AI being integrated into this infrastructure, and how does one make sense of the scale of this, given the size of India? And
so the scale is crazy. So India is about 1.4 billion in population. Aadhaar has been so far rolled out to about 1.3 billion people. So it's almost the entire population. And every day they have about 80 million transactions every single day. 80 billion transactions on a population of 1.3 billion is a lot. And it's a split-second response time. You've got fast track for all the highway networks for automatic payment. You've got Digi Yatra for anybody who's traveling for Digi Yatra. You've got UPI, of course. You've got Bhashini, which is a LLM for Indian languages. India is complex because it's got 22 major languages, and each one is very different. So therefore, they are able to talk to each other in different languages using Bhashini. Now you are able to connect UPI with Bhashini, and therefore you can give oral commands for a financial transaction in multiple languages. You can speak in Tamil or Marathi or Bengali, and it does the transaction. So you're connecting Bhashini with UPI. So that's all AI interconnection. And that's how it's made. So for the average villager who does not know how to read or write, but is able to speak a local language, can now suddenly do financial transactions. They're using it for medical science to train neurosurgeons on microsurgery using different languages. And you're doing research around breast cancer, again using AI to detect. So a lot of things are happening at the grassroots that may not be visible to us at this level. But the impact is felt deep in the rural parts of the country, in the villages.
Yeah, the example you gave about being able to communicate with the payments interface in multiple languages seems really powerful, given that before Aadhaar card, before UPI, a very small proportion of the population, perhaps 20–25%, had access to formal banking. And now this is universal and accessible, as you say, to everyone in rural India.
So the impact is felt because suddenly you are including a huge population of the country into financial transactions, into medical opportunities and things like that. And that suddenly lifts the economic environment in the country.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about what everyone talks about, which is the demographic dividend in India. And one of the statistics that's kind of mind-boggling is 1 in 4 workers in the world will be of Indian origin. most of India's population is between 15 and 59, over 60%. So here you have both an opportunity and a challenge, because clearly this demographic bulge in that working age population can lead to great growth, productivity, and all of that. But on the flip side, you have to enable the skilling of these workers and make sure that they are trained for the jobs of the future.
Yeah.
So what's your view on what could be done to train this workforce given AI on the horizon?
So the government has launched several programs where they're creating AI labs in tier 2, tier 3 cities. They've funded several programs that are building AI in the curriculum at a bachelor's degree, master's degree, as well as PhD. So the moment you have that in the core curriculum, the moment you bring in labs in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and other examples like the one I gave where we are using these women in villages, that's certainly lifting the entire expertise and knowledge base across all these things. So yeah, so that's really helping the country. Outside of that, there are many large organizations investing heavily in building language models and building foundation models and implementing AI. So I think, and with the strategy that India has to become the AI workshop for the world, it's really, I think, focusing very heavily on quickly educating people. There's a difference here, though, I must say. There are two parts. One is the technical education. How do you program? How do you design these systems? But that's still niche for a bunch of engineers. Then there are many others who are users of that technology. And how do you use the technology and leverage it for your own advantage? Like the example of connecting UPI with Bhashini. And now that's not the engineering. There are a few engineers who will do that. But certainly by doing that, you can create business models that allow people to flourish. And that is all driven by AI.
So you talked about languages in India. You talked about the fact that a lot of the Indian workforce is also serving clients in the US, for example. The original example being business process outsourcing or call centers in India. And that's also a large use case for AI. So how do you see these call centers or that kind of service opportunity in India, which is threatened by AI? How do you see it transforming itself?
So it is transforming in two ways. So on the one hand, it appears to be threatening, which is correct. But on the other hand, today, the way we communicate with people, you're talking about social media, you're talking about cell phones, you're talking about emails, you're talking about portals. So there are so many different formats of communicating. And then you are also profiling each individual, because when you're talking about a call center, you've got to understand each individual's personality, traits, and communicate in that fashion. So when you're doing that, it's not physically possible to manually do all those things. So you need AI agents that can pull information from multiple sources on the fly while you're talking to a person and give you the relevant information in a capsule so that you can use that in your conversation. So in fact, it's augmenting them, and they're able to do a lot more than what they could earlier. Because the way of communication has become far more complex and on multi-channel. So the moment you're using multiple channels and complex communications, then you need to, so it's actually helping. And if you don't do that, somebody else will. And the moment somebody else will, you will lose the business.
So if I can just push back a little bit on that, you don't see a chatbot, for example, replacing call center employees.
No, it's augmenting it, it's not replacing. But that employee is able to do a lot more, much more efficiently and much faster. And therefore, the volume a person handles has increased manifold.
Right. Which means in the end that it could lead to a loss of employment in that sector. So there might be some retraining required, perhaps?
So there is a lot of retraining required. And of course, one has to move very fast on that. Having said that, I don't think it'll create a loss of jobs. It'll change the profile of jobs. So in a little philosophical way, if I give a philosophical view, if you go back probably 100 years ago, people rode horse carriages. And then came in the automobile. And today, you virtually see no horse carriages on the road. They're only automobiles. But there are more car drivers than there were horse carriage riders. The job profile has changed from riding a horse carriage to driving a car. But there are many more drivers now than there were riders. So it will change the profile, but I think it'll create more employment.
Let's talk a little bit about Datamatics. And you said already an example of how you are leveraging AI and also involved in developing some of these regions, the social impact of your work and so on. Is there anything else that you're thinking of leveraging AI in your own business?
Yeah, so we launched this whole AI initiative about 10 years ago. And for the last 10 years, we've been doing a lot of work in AI. Today, we call that classic AI. The new AI is generative AI, which is probably now a year and a half old or maybe 2 years old at best. Generative AI still has some challenges in terms of its accuracy, in terms of its scalability, in terms of its performance. The cost, it is still very expensive. But so you have to use a mixture of classic AI and generative AI together. And in doing so, I think there are several programs that we've launched, several projects that we are doing, which is really helping our customers. So for example, there's one customer that we have, they've got to move 40,000 reports that they have to a newer technology. Now, to manually rewrite 40,000 reports is a hell of a job, and it'll be very expensive, so they're kind of stuck. But using AI, we are able to extract the business logic out of those reports and re-engineer or rewrite the code in the newer technology, a new platform. So now with the use of AI, you can migrate 40,000 reports from an old system to a new system and generate that. These are all dashboards. They are dynamic dashboards. So that's one example. We talked about doing financial analysis and underwriting. So there are many such examples where we are using it. There's one customer that we are doing, where we do about something like 70,000 transactions a day. And we are analyzing financial transactions for them. Basis that they're able to collect the money faster from the customers. And that's making an impact of about $15 million a day for them in terms of benefit. So here are genuine cases of an ROI where the customer sees an ROI very, very soon in millions of dollars. So AI is transforming the way, so they become more efficient. We get a great opportunity to do innovative work. There's another very interesting example that we use. So we used genetic algorithms. These are genomics, which are self-mutating models. And we use that for fraud detection. So you could look at a bank, you could look at transactions, and a person who's a fraudster does not follow the same pattern again. He changes his pattern of behavior. So when you change a pattern of behavior, your model stops working. So here we were able to use genetic algorithms that mutate, that dynamically evolve to track the fraudster. Now, using this technology, we could then go to the anti-terror squad, and the anti-terror squad could track, and they were tracking cell phone communication, they were tracking messages, they were tracking phone calls, they were tracing people, but that's what they do. And keeping in mind, India is a very complex country because you have 22 major languages, different cultures. When you speak in a sentence, you make one sentence out of 3 or 4 languages stitched together. And then you speak in cryptic languages. So here we could use AI to help the anti-terror squad track activities that are happening in the terrorist network, and therefore take proactive steps to prevent any unfortunate instance. So here's a very interesting example where you're able to pull information from multiple sources, different languages, on the fly, and forewarn the authorities that there's trouble brewing here and you need to take corrective steps. What is the impact of that? Huge in terms of social impact.
Yeah. So in a world in which everyone is racing to adopt AI, how do you see the competitive advantage? Who's going to have the advantage?
So if you see what's happening, it's like when you run a marathon race. When you have a marathon, and I'm sure all of you have seen the New York Marathon, there are 20,000 runners, and all of them are there at the start. The one that will win is not the one that's the biggest, it's the one that moves the fastest. So if you look at what's happening in AI, the giants, IBM, Oracle, SAP, Microsoft, none of them came out with AI. The ones that came out with AI are the small ones. OpenAI, Mistral, Liquid AI, all these relatively unknown. They were well funded. So the point I'm making is that the winner will be the one who moves the fastest and who's the most nimble and not necessarily the largest who's got the maximum money or financial strength.
I want to spend a few minutes talking about the ethical aspects of AI. We've all heard about different challenges with AI, challenges for data privacy, challenges for security. So what's your view on how these should be addressed both globally as well as in the Indian context? And is the Indian government putting any guardrails around the use of AI?
Yeah, India has taken good strides already to bring in some framework for the ethical elements of AI. It is a big issue. It is a big cause for concern. AI can mislead you very easily. Having said that, the bigger fear that I have as an individual is not so much about enterprises using or misusing AI. I fear states and governments misusing it for political reasons. And you could have international politics being played out with the abuse of AI and to overthrow governments or to influence elections and things like that. Those would be, I think, more dangerous. Having said that, I think most organizations are fairly sensitive when it comes to ethics and morality. And many organizations are putting in their own framework on their own accord to make sure that they follow certain principles. And of course, governments are bringing in some regulation as well. So that is happening. But the bigger fear that I have is really state-sponsored abuse of AI.
Thank you. It's really interesting. I think we should turn it over to the audience to ask some questions at this point.
I had a question for you about optimization of AI within India and outside of India. So you mentioned UPI, you mentioned Digital Yatra. Within India, it's very easy to use. As an NRI, it's a nightmare to get into the system. So as you mentioned, the kind of growth in AI over time, I'm curious your thoughts on what is the right strategy to go forward with AI development in India. There are more people in India. Do you optimize for that, or do you optimize for a globalized world?
I think they're two different worlds. There are these service companies in India that service an international customer base. So that's really more private. And they would obviously tune their models for the international customers. Within India, it'll be driven by a different set of organizations and certainly the government of India. So the government of India is focusing on India itself, and that's really where it'll make a difference. I don't think the Indian model will be applicable in other parts of the world, and vice versa. The other parts of the world will not be applicable to India because you need to be culturally acclimatized and sensitive when you're deploying these models. So each region, if I may, is building models that are unique to themselves. So the Middle East with Arabia and Saudi and all of that is one group. You've got India as another group. You've got Europe as one cluster of a region. The dynamics, the cultures, the values are very different, but similar. So they kind of cluster. I don't think any one model will be able to handle all of them together. They technically can, but they won't do such a good job. So you'll need to have more specialized models coming out that are unique for each country. Although the underlying platform may be one, but nevertheless, there'll be specialized models for that.
Just on that point, the digital public infrastructure is something that India is trying to export and around the world, right? So that's something that could be a global standard, perhaps.
Sure. So the digital public infrastructure, thanks for bringing that up. India has launched it already in 15 other countries, and India plans to take it to about 50 other countries in the next 5 years. So, and not the entire model, components of it. So India is therefore spreading its wings and taking that same platform to multiple countries where they can use it as a backbone for the enterprise. Yeah.
You said we're at the right spot at the right time. The wave is just building up. What advice would you give us in terms of making the right career choices, learning the right skills, or partnering with the right organizations as a student who would want to ride this wave and make some impact out of it?
So there are two groups of people. So one is the engineering group that's actually engineering it. And the second group is the people who are using it. And I think the bigger opportunity is for the people who are using it to see how and where you can deploy it. It's like the car. Now, when you drive a car, you really don't understand the engineering in it. I mean, you could, but by and large not. But you know how to use the car, and you know how to leverage it. Now, if you understand that a motor can be put into a boat, and the same motor can be put into a motorcycle, and the same motor can go into the car, and the same motor can go into an aircraft. And effectively, you have a very different solution, but it's the same motor that works that gives you a very different answer. So for a person who's trying to capture this opportunity, to really understand how I could deploy this AI in different use cases, in different business models, and therefore take advantage of the growth opportunity. The engineering of the motor is a different ballgame. So there are two sets, I said. Somebody who's engineering the motor, and then somebody who is deploying it in different situations to create a very different kind of vehicle. Now you might fly or you might be under this ocean, very, very different. So for a person like yourselves, I think the opportunity is great. You've got to just figure out how do I deploy AI in different business scenarios to capture the opportunity.
So my question is, I thought that was a pretty cool insight, what you guys did in Ballari, where you brought about new opportunities in India with AI. As a former engineer and with friends who are engineers in India, I think there's also a bit of a risk for software engineers, especially more junior engineers, in their jobs being replaced by AI or like reduced by AI. And so I'm kind of wondering on like how you foresee this transformation going.
So you're right. And today, as we speak, 60% of code on GitHub is AI generated. And you can't even imagine 60% is AI generated. And that's only going to increase. So very soon, coding in many ways will be obsolete. But with the same breath, you know, it's like when I was young, we would actually calculate numbers manually. We were not allowed to use calculators in school. And then came in the calculators, and then came in the computers. So today you don't do any calculation, it's all done. But therefore you're able to do a lot more because all the basic grunt work has been done by the machine. So it's the same way, writing code is not as important as building business solutions or building software systems that will then do things. So the function has changed, and I don't think coding will be a great career choice today. And probably there's a concept or there's a belief that in the next 5 years, there'll be no more coders. Now, you can take it with a pinch of salt, maybe 5, maybe 7, 8 years, fine. But the world of coding will shrink. And the question is, how do I quickly build a software solution that then drives my business? So today, what would take me 1 year to build a code, I can probably do it in 4 weeks or 3 weeks using low code, no code. And therefore, I don't need to write code. But in 4 weeks, if I build a solution, I go to market faster, I capture an opportunity faster, I move much faster. The pace of change is much higher.
I think one thing you mentioned that was interesting is that humans think very linearly, and for AI to kind of comprehend it, it's going so fast. Sometimes I can't really keep up. I guess like what are some ways in which you could like kind of train your mindset, or how do you approach it differently so it is faster? Or I guess for me, like sometimes I think like I need to understand everything. How do you move beyond that point where it's like I have to understand it as opposed to like let me just keep going and absorb that?
So right now the pace of change is so rapid. Literally every day there's something new. Every day there are about 350 new products being launched in AI. Literally every day today as we speak. There's no way on earth you can keep pace with all of that, not possible. And therefore I think it's very important to focus on a certain area and get a deeper expertise in that specific area and just leverage that, because you just can't keep pace. And there are 8 billion people in the world, and 8 billion people are going to do 8 billion things. And there's no way one man can capture those 8 billion things that they're doing. So I think focusing on one area and just specializing is more important. And it's right now moving at a pace that we've never seen ever in the history of humankind.
I have two somewhat related questions. The first one is that right now, as a business owner working in the space of AI, do you view it as a phase of investment right now, and this investment will see its profits and remuneration to the shareholders after a period of time? And do you see this as a phase where everybody has to double down on investing because it's yet to be seen who the winners are, and people are still coming up the curve, right? And second thing is, in the same light, I read about your partnership with Microsoft as well. Is this a phase where you will be partnering with the big companies and working with them to see how best to serve and work, find solutions that are acceptable to the industries?
Sure. So this is the phase of investment. You're absolutely right. Today, in the world of AI, everybody's losing money. There are three groups of companies. One group that's building the infrastructure, the NVIDIAs of the world. They're building the chips. You've got the data centers. They are actually making a lot of money because they're building the core infrastructure. The second group are the ones who are building the foundation models, like OpenAI. They are losing money every day. The reason they are very well funded, but if you look at a P&L, they're actually bleeding every day. But because they're funded from equity and whoever, they don't have a financial problem. And then the third group is companies who are using AI. Banks, insurance companies, medical hospitals, companies like ours, which is the tech companies. So these guys are still flirting with the idea. Today, about 9% have deployed AI in production. About 9% have decided not even to look at AI, or they're not even looking at it. About 30% are doing some proof of concept or some pilot project, and about 50% are still sort of looking at it very carefully, but doing nothing about it. So only really 9% have really done anything meaningful. So the opportunity is huge. But these companies are very confused. So a hospital does not know how to use it in their world, and we don't know what kind of solution to give them. So there's a lot of confusion. The other issue is that there's a huge expectation gap. The moment you use the word AI, they think it's a magic wand that solves all your problems. And they expect 100% output. And AI is far away from 100% output. If it gives you a 30-40% productivity gain, I think that's fantastic. And you should just go with it, because 30-40% productivity gain in any company is huge. But they're expecting 100%. And even humans don't deliver 100%. So that's an issue. There's a big expectation gap. And the models are still not mature. The models are still evolving, and they're evolving very fast.
My question is regarding some of these new models which are coming in. What are some of the challenges in terms of change management when you have been deploying with your clients? How do they kind of push back on deploying some of these AI, and what are some of the measures that you take for deploying that change management?
So change management is a big problem, and that's part of this whole transformation. Changing the mindset of your own team is a huge issue, because you just don't, it's like me asking you to speak Chinese. You can't, right? And therefore, you'll have to go through a whole learning process to really start speaking a different language. So changing the mindset. So we've had several programs in the organization to encourage them to learn new things. We've opened up the floodgates. We've given them incentives. We give them awards. So several different soft elements. Every time an opportunity comes, we give it to a cell that looks at how do I deploy AI in it first. And that cell that try to figure out, and they are experts in that space. And then they come back saying, this is how we do it. But there is a resistance. There's a fear. So that is a problem. The customer is a bigger problem, because as much as AI hallucinates, the customers hallucinate more than the AI, because they have some funny imagination in their mind as to what it can do. And that's a big problem. So we need to bring them down to earth. And that's not easy. You go through the pains of explaining and talking and discussing. But yeah, that once, I think what problems these have is they try to do the most difficult problem with AI. And that's the wrong approach. You've got to first take simpler problems, solve that, and then grow with that. It's like a child when he learns how to crawl. He doesn't start running the Olympic race. He crawls, and then he walks, and then he runs. And at some stage, when he's really very mature, he runs the Olympics. But here the expectations are, wow, it's AI, it can run the Olympics on day one. It's not there. But to your point on Microsoft, so we are using their foundation models from OpenAI. And that's really what we're using. And then we're building solutions around using that.
You mentioned that 9% of companies currently are using AI, while 50% are kind of exploring. So my question rather is, at what point do you think AI is really going to be able to be leveraged by medium-sized enterprises who want to but don't necessarily have the in-house tech to do it?
So they're already beginning to use it in pockets. So people use it in marketing to make their literature, the collateral, the websites. They're using it for building a business plan. They're using it to analyze the P&L. So they're already beginning to use pieces of it. But here's the concept on the exponential curve. It's slowly at first and all of a sudden. So right now we are the slowly at first stage. When it takes off, you don't know, but it'll just take off very fast. And you cannot get in when it's taking off because it's too late. So you've got to be in the race early enough so that when it takes off, you're actually on board that plane. But once it's taken off, it's too late.
Sorry, just a follow-up to the earlier question. So, just like you are really coming up with your own OpenAI solutions, there are several other Indian companies as well who I'm sure are also trying to do the same, right? Do you see a challenge right now? And on top of all of this, you also have this challenge where you also have to educate the customer about how the solution can impact and make their life easier, right? So how is that dynamic playing out? Because I'm sure like before this on a normal project, you had RFPs to, get into. Is it still the same? Like, is the selling getting different when it comes to an AI solution?
So they have RFPs that are very, you see, the problem is they don't know what they want. That's the biggest problem. So when they create a specification or an RFP, they put in things that are crazy. Technically doable, but it's not going to happen in 2 months. It will require a lot more training of the model and a lot more tweaking. And that's where there's a huge gap. So it's very important for the customer and for all of us to understand that you've got to start with baby steps and implement baby steps. And as you learn, as they learn, and as we learn, and as the technology platforms learn, then it'll move much faster and you walk in tandem. Today, they're expecting that you've got a ready solution that's already working. But it's not a ready solution because nobody's deployed it before. It's never happened before. So you cannot have something that's perfect, that works. You've got to evolve. And that phase of evolution, that process of evolution is when you really need to partner together and work together rather than expect somebody to deliver a solution.
As AI is growing, it's also coinciding with increasing anti-Muslim sentiment in India. And my question for you is generally as people in private industry, what do we need to do to continue to protect those groups? Similarly, what does the government need to do in terms of regulation to protect those groups, particularly when sometimes it's the government that's increasing the sentiment itself?
So I don't think AI has got anything to do with it. I think it's really political. And I think it's just some groups that make more noise and some groups that make less noise. It's about making noise from politics point of view. There are many other minorities in India that you don't even hear of. Parsis are minorities, the Jews are minorities. There's so many of them, you don't even hear of them. There is really no discrimination, and it's got nothing to do with AI. It's purely politics, and it's purely a vote bank kind of a game that plays out. There are religious sentiments that do run high, and people use it and abuse it for their own agendas and their own purposes. But again, it's got nothing to do with technology.
You were mentioning that today, if we look at the snapshot, NVIDIA is making a lot of money and OpenAI is not making money. But if we look into the next 5 to 10 years, what are the companies and what are the industries that you see like capturing most of the value generated by AI and not necessarily transferring all that value to its customers?
That's a tough one to answer. So all industries that are using a lot of information is really where AI plays. So all these services organizations, whether it's healthcare services, financial services, all the services space, everything that deals with content, your whole social media, the publishing industries, all of that will be hugely impacted with AI. It's like the dot-com era. You may not remember, but during about 2000, you had this dot-com wave, and every company and everybody was a dot-com. And 98% died. And the ones that came out is Google, Amazon, Facebook. These are poster boys of the dot-com era. Similarly, in AI, there'll be a few winners. We don't know who. 90% will probably die, but a few ones will really capture the opportunity. But everybody will use it. So it's like Facebook, everybody uses it. And it's like eBay and Amazon, everybody uses it. Similarly, AI will be used by everybody, you and me included, literally on our fingertips all the time. But the ones that will capture the opportunity from a commercial point of view will be somebody like an Amazon or somebody else like an OpenAI perhaps.
I think my question relates to a couple of questions that have been asked already. How do you build a competitive advantage for application layers? So you've mentioned the 3 users of AI and the necessity to integrate AI early on before the ship sails. But there's also this huge risk of just being pushed out of market and 98% of the companies or the applicators will fail, right? So how do you develop a competitive advantage in the application layer?
I think it's very important that, okay, so ideally you want to do an end-to-end solution. And if it works literally end-to-end, then you've got a great platform, a great opportunity to capture. That's not easy to do because the easier one is when you do piecemeal work in between. But the piecemeal work is not exciting enough for many customers. So they'll use it, but the ROI is still limited. And therefore, really identify some workflow where you are touching the end-to-end solution and then systematically go piece by piece by piece by piece. Rather than you can do random pieces here and a random piece there and a random piece there, that's not a good idea. So for example, can you use a tool like a screwdriver in multiple areas? The answer is yes, you can use a screwdriver in many areas. But can you build a car with a screwdriver? No, you need many other tools. So I'll build a wheel, I'll build an engine, I'll build a seat, I'll build this, and that puts the whole piece together. Rather than just do seats, or just wheels. So that, I think for AI, they are all looking at the end-to-end solution. If you have the financial muscle and the domain knowledge, you can build one. But if you're a startup or a young company, you can't do that. And therefore, you really have to pick up one piece that's easy, that's high volume. Focus on the volume, because that's really where the AI makes an impact. Where there are high volume transactions, high volume interactions, that's when it makes the maximum impact. And then build that piece for the whole value chain of that piece, depending on the industry now.
Thank you, Rahul. I want to thank you so much. I think this was a fascinating look into AI from so many different perspectives, and also trying to understand how it's going to impact business, but also how we can leverage it and learn more about it and different use cases, and how our students can actually be innovators in this space. So really appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gita, and thank you, everyone. Thank you.